Hi, my name is Geoff Smallpiece. I've been asked to make a contribution to the West Somerset Railway TV initiative and to give my views as a visitor and enthusiast on my thoughts about the West Somerset Railway. So here are my meanderings of a steam and heritage railway enthusiast, and in particular my visits over the years to the West Somerset. The West Somerset Railway preserves the heritage of a seaside branch railway of yesteryear. This is what I like about it. It's a remembrance of a time when not all families had cars or holiday makers, and they would mainly travel to the seaside by train, or even indeed have a day out by the train. And you can see the time and effort to restore the line back to its historical condition. In the locomotives, whether steam or diesel, and of course in the carriages and the services that are being run. For me, it sort of takes me back to a gentler age. It shows what engineering could achieve pre this electronic age. The durability of what was made and how it's now still working long after its design span has finished. How did I become a steam buff or heritage railway enthusiast? Well, that all goes back to the early 60s when my grandfather used to visit my uncle in Salisbury by train. My uncle was the gardener to Sir Cecil Beaton, and my grandfather was retired from being the head gardener at a large house near to Wisley. So my recollections are of my father taking us to Weybridge Station with my grandfather and all his luggage, and seeing him off from there. So what we were used to do, we walk across the bridge so we could wave off my grandfather, could see him down below on the platforms. On one occasion there was a huge whistle, and all of a sudden we were enveloped in steam. This is what was one of the large express locomotives of the time, running through the fast line on Down Express to the West Country. My next experience, because my parents noticed I'd become fascinated by all things steam and trains, so they arranged a day out, and they told me it was to see one of my favourite entertainers of that era, Mr. Pastry, and the day trip ended up to the Bluebell Railway, where there was a small 2 or 3 ancient coached train sitting there with a small locomotive on either end. So we went for a little ride up and down the line, pulled by the locos and pulled back. And we arrived back into Sheffield Park, where Mr. Pastry got up to his antics on a small traction engine like locomotive, which I think was named Blue Circle. That was the highlight of the day. Moving forward to when I started secondary school, I used to have to walk down from the bus stop in Thames Ditton down to the school. As part of this, I passed by the large viaduct that was part of Hampton Court Junction. If you were lucky, you could see a steam express thunder by in either direction. These occurrences became very few, and at the time I hadn't realised why, but they were gradually, the expresses were replaced by smart, new, shiny electric trains. As part of my summer holidays, my parents used to take the family to Butlins all over the country. When I was about 15 or 16, we ended up at Minehead, and I remember 2 locomotives in Butlins and Minehead. Another engine which I can't now remember, but a child's playground where you could climb up and muck about, or whatever children did at that time. As a part of a walk down the seafront, we noticed this decrepit old station, very sad looking, all grassed up and really unloved. And a notice of intention of some group or other that they were trying to set up a commuter service into Taunton. So didn't think much more of that until a couple of years later, till we returned to Minehead Butlins once more. I think it was at the time I'd just taken my A-levels. By this time the railway had reopened. I obtained a leaflet from Butlins and looked at the timetable because I wanted a day out from my parents to have an adventure on the railway. So I determined from a very strange timetable, it was a very strange service, that the only day really that I could get to ride on a steam train or indeed see the whole of the line was on a Sunday. I duly set out to do exactly that. So I arrived in the station, found a few carriages of a rundown, fairly manky condition. I think they were Mark 1s in a sort of a chocolate and cream Western region sort of livery, but the insides were possibly come straight out of a British rail service because they weren't up to much really. And on the front of it was a small industrial saddle tank locomotive which pulled us up the line, fairly clanky and bumpy because I don't think the locomotive was really intended for a passenger train. To get to see the whole of the line at that point, which I think it only went to Stogumber at the time, I had to detrain at Williton and await a DMU shuttle train. At this point, I bumped into my old music teacher. I think his name was Chris Redwood. Perhaps people may remember or know him. We were a bit surprised to see each other. We chatted about steam railways, volunteering, this sort of thing. I was looking for somewhere to lunch and I sort of told him what my plans were. It was to get the next train along. So he gave me directions to a pub which was just over a mile away from the next station. So I duly got onto this strange looking DMU, which I think was a sort of creamy colour with a sort of brown whiskers on the front, and promptly walked to this pub. So the service was strange because if I didn't go back on that train, then I think it was something like a two-hour wait for the next one back to Minehead. So I duly went to the pub. By this time it was nearly closing time. Unfortunately, it started to rain, and talking to the landlord, I said what I was doing and that I was going to get soaked because by the time I got back to the station I would have had a long wait for the next train. So he said to me, he said, "Look son, buy yourself a sandwich and a pickled onion when you next order a pint and sit there and don't eat it." The reason for this was part of the licensing law of the time was that you could stay in the pub drinking alcohol if it was part of a substantial meal, and a substantial meal apparently was a sandwich and a pickled onion. Told me not to eat it until I was ready to leave, which I promptly did. I missed the rain shower and managed to get back in time for the DMU, which took me all the way back to Minehead. The good thing about the DMU was you had a particularly good view forward out of the cab, so that was quite an experience. About 10 years ago, my life changed and circumstances changed, and as a result of this, I ended up on a cheap weekend break courtesy of a well-known national newspaper. This was to a caravan park near Donnyford Halt. Unfortunately, at that time, West Somerset was closed. It was out of season. Well, it would be because it was a cheap holiday. I ended up having a good look round at Bishop's Lydiard. I had a good look round Williton, where I discovered some interesting diesel locomotives. I think there was a Western, a high mech and a warship. And then spent a lot of time walking and looking around Minehead, visiting the shop and facilities there. The next visit was spring gala, and I hadn't quite realised that it was happening, but I discovered that the turntable was going to be used, and that quite interested me. I was sort of fascinated by how they worked, so we duly went down a trip from Bishop's Lydiard down to Minehead. Had a wander around there, watched the turntable in action, grabbed a bite, and returned back. After that, I visited a couple more times, but this was just not anything to do with galas, but just for a ride on a couple of occasions. And then last year, my visit coincided with the autumn steam gala, which featured mainly pannier tanks, which were one of my favourite Great Western type coes, plus a couple of other visitors. Decided this year to make a return visit in March, but unfortunately it was the week before lockdown. As an observer, the West Somerset has achieved a lot over the years, and I can see the fruits of this labour every time I visit. Unfortunately, to keep such an enterprise going is becoming ever more expensive, mainly due to the age and the lack of components and the skills needed to maintain it in a running condition. So I feel, or I hope, I have contributed in a small way of keeping things going by visiting, taking a ride on the line, buying something in the shop, buying something in the cafeterias, or or a cup of tea, a second-hand book here or there, and a donation or two here and there. I wish the West Somerset all the best for the future, and look forward to my next visit there. I'm sure it will be another enjoyable trip along the line, and more for me to see. And perhaps I can investigate some of the stations that I haven't previously visited, and I can learn a little more. Thank you very much.